the female members of our panel here this morning. Over the past day or two, a certain word has taken on a degree of currency, and it has been suggested, or perhaps alleged, that questioning the whole psychiatric issue, questioning the whole possibility of numbers using the suicide clause as an argument for abortion is an insult to women. Could I ask you if you feel that it is an insult to women? Could I ask you if you would feel that our current restrictions on abortion is an insult to women? Could I ask you if you feel that countries where there is a much more liberal abortion regime, we'll say Britain, China, India, are women in those countries somehow held in higher esteem or held in higher regard? In other words, this concept of something being an insult to women. Are our abortion laws an insult to Irish women?
Deputy Mercer, Cork and Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask the group, the people that are in here today, if they agree that there's a difference between guidelines and regulations, and if they accept, if so, that guidelines don't have the force of law and could be legally challenged. And I also want to ask those who are present who are recorded on the EWN TV channel, if they agree with the statement which is made on it that agents of the culture of death are attempting to have abortion legalised in this country, and also that the Irish government are currently legalising abortion in Ireland under the guise of exceptional cases. Thank you.
Deputy Bernard Durkin.
Thank you, Chairman. 3 quick questions. Again, given that there is a disparity of views, as we have seen and heard over the past number of years and over the past number of days, and in particular a disparity in the degree of emphasis, depending on which side of the argument one finds oneself on, is it not immeasurably better to have legislation to ensure consistency of treatment for women who are pregnant in all circumstances, and thereby eliminate the possibility of throwing the responsibility on the practitioners? 2, reference has been made to the possibility of setting aside Supreme Court interpretation of a previous amendment to the Constitution. Is it accepted that while one may disagree with the courts and even the Supreme Court's decisions from time to time, is it not still accepted that the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court and the ultimate authority as we now stand in the determination of what is constitutional and what is not? And the last part of the question, numerous comparisons have been made with the situation in the UK as being applicable in this country. Can I ask the question as to whether or not it is a worthwhile comparison, given the written constitution in Ireland's case and the reliance on the Magna Carta in the UK?
Thank you. Senator Vanabachik.
Thanks, Chair. And just following that last comment, could the legal representatives opposite just clarify? I think I heard one of you say that there was risk of suicide was a ground in the English Act. And I mean, I've just looked again at the 1967 Abortion Act, and of course, as you'll all be aware, risk of suicide does not require to be proven. The test is a much lower test of injury to physical or mental health of the woman. So really, to compare the English provision and the Irish law as it currently is in terms of the Constitution and the X-case test, really, there's no comparison. The X-case test is a much higher standard of real and substantial risk to the life of the woman. Following from that, again, a correction I'd like you to clarify on. Some of you have spoken about a change of culture by legislation. How can it be a change of culture when the legislation we're talking about is legislation to implement existing law in terms of the Constitution and the Supreme Court decision in the X case? Thirdly, in terms of the criminal law in the 1861 Act, doctors have testified, as you've all heard, that they have a fear of being prosecuted. The only reason why there have been no prosecutions over the last few decades is because abortion is legal in England and 4,000 women are travelling to England. And we heard evidence from the doctors earlier in the week as to research that has been conducted showing, for example, infanticide rate prosecutions have increased in Ireland during World War II when it was very difficult to travel. And we have seen, as women have been able to travel to England in numbers we have, that prosecutions haven't occurred. And I should say, finally, I'm probably the only person here who's been threatened with jail in 1989 for giving out information on abortion. I'm very glad to say our law has moved on now, and students are no longer faced with the threat of imprisonment for that. But it is a very real fear of prosecution.
Thank you, Senator Susan O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say, if you like, collectively to all the witnesses, and thank you for your time, but it seems to me you've all effectively dismissed
between you the Supreme Court judgment, both referendums, the ruling of the European Court of Human Rights, the expert group's findings, the Master of the Rotunda, the bona fides of psychiatrists, and you appear to want to believe that the clarity that we have is sufficient and that legislation is not indeed required. And so perhaps it is Ms. Breed O'Brien's version of life, which I found quite a shocking statement. It isn't the baby who ruins your life, it's everyone else. Is it the case, do any of you call yourselves Democrats?
Thank you. And finally, on Senator Martin Conway.
And I'd like to say that the proceedings have been very enlightening, and indeed we have witnesses here from both the pro-choice and the pro-life side of this particular deliberation. But I would hope that from these proceedings that we will see a pro-common sense approach to dealing with this problem. And I've just one other question specifically for Youth Defence. I would consider some of the campaigning that Youth Defence have done in the past barbaric, to say the least. I would ask them directly, are they going to change their tactical campaigning over the course of the decision-making that will take place in the next number of months regarding this legislation? Or are we going to see appalling billboard campaigns throughout this country over the next number of months? I mean, it's a specific question, Chairman, that I would like a specific answer to.
Senator. And finally, my apologies, I missed Deputy John Potfield, my apologies.
I thought you'd seen me. Sorry about that, Chairman.
Anyway.
I'm not sure who to direct my question to, but I've listened for the last 3 days. I've been at virtually all of the sessions, and I'm interested that there's not as much disagreement, perhaps, as I might have anticipated. And I'd like to ask the witnesses that are here now, in relation to the existing statute that's on our books, the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act, that has, I suppose, is the kernel of the difficulties that were pointed out by medical professionals who were here earlier in the week, and its contradiction by the Constitutional Amendment of 1983 as judged by the Supreme Court. Is it not possible, in light of the fact that all of you have spoken, have said that you accept the current medical practice whereby terminations which are required to protect the life of the mother should be allowed, that a legislation would be introduced in 2013 which would see the constitutional provision enshrined in our law, but that the ban on abortion would be protected? And I'm also particularly interested, Dr. De Vries mentioned that, and don't think I'm misquoting you, that you weren't against legislation per se, and perhaps you might directly answer.
Thank you. We'll start with Dr. Barry Curley. I think the pro-life campaign, we'll move around. Thank you. 5 minutes now in terms of the totality of your replies.
Yeah, apologies. It's just I have to go, so I asked if I could speak for very briefly. Then, first of all, the question about as a woman. Is it an insult to women? It's something that has arisen here. I'll be utterly honest about it. I actually think emotive language doesn't help in this, and I think you need to have a clear head in dealing with this. If you do what's just, and if you do what's fair, that's not going to be an insult to anybody. If you take into account the rights of everybody involved, I don't think you need to become... things will be said about you and thrown at you, but in the end of the day, the important thing is that we do what is just and what is fair. So I would leave the emotive language out of it. There is no disparity of views as far as I'm aware, and I think you would be of the same opinion. There is no disparity of views about what is needed to be done for any woman who is ill during her pregnancy. Everybody is agreed on that. The difficulty you're faced with is that you're being asked to legislate for more than that. That's where there is a disparity of view. Again, there's no disparity of view that from any of the presentations you've had, as far as I'm aware, that abortion is not a remedy for suicide, and that furthermore, abortion is associated with an increased risk of suicide. And the only thing I can say about the comment on the Supreme Court is, as far as I know, it's not considered to be infallible. It is the best we have at any given moment. But if we find, like it's 20 years ago, the Supreme Court did not hear the evidence you've been hearing for the last 2 days. I suspect if it had, it would have reached a very different conclusion. I think there's no getting away from the fact that it is actually time
to revisit that Supreme Court decision, much and all as none of us like to think in terms of a referendum. And I'd like to hand over to Caroline.
And can I thank you for coming in? I know you have to go, you did say at the beginning, and thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Okay. Just in relation to the questions, I'll deal with two together. Are we lobbying politicians? No, we're not here to lobby politicians. We're here to answer your questions as far as is possible in our own ability. In relation to EWTN, I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, I can't help you with that one. Senator Paul Bradford's question in relation to the insult to women has been very well dealt with by Dr. Calley. I agree with her. Suicide, well, it's not for no reason that Senator Batchik wants suicide left in, because you can't legislate for the X case without it. And I'll just repeat, the testimony that you have heard over the last 2 days has been absolutely conclusive. There is no argument that suicidality can be any treatment or the only treatment. There's abortion can be the only treatment for suicidality, and that being the case, why would you want to legislate to do something which will have no improving effect and has been seen to have a harmful effect on women? It just does not make sense. In relation to Senator Healy-Eames's question, do we have to legislate for suicide because of the European Court of Human Rights ABC decision? No, we don't. We don't at all. That court recognised that we may make our own policy in Ireland in relation to abortion and the right to life. We make policy. Once we've made the policy and we've made the law, we have to make sure that our citizens can understand it and know that they can avail of it. And in relation to the other questions that say, can we do this by guidelines? How can we do it? I just say to you, the court itself said they observe that at the moment that the medical guidelines don't in any event provide any particular precision as to the criteria by which a doctor is to assess risk. That doesn't mean that they can't. And we have got examples of non-statutory guidelines that have been issued with respect to clinical decision making, even this year. It was recognised in the UK by the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists that by 2008 the biggest killer of pregnant women was actually sepsis in pregnancy. How did they address that? They addressed that by by April 2012, they issued a set of guidelines specifically on sepsis in pregnancy, how to recognise it and how to manage it. And the Irish Institute of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists did similarly also in April 2012 in relation to the management of miscarriage in the first trimester. So it's entirely possible to do it, and there are many examples of where this has been done, which you can look to and which we can give you information on again.
I take Breeder O'Brien from the Irish Institute next.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave the legal end of things to Ms. Steen, who's far more high.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, Deputy O'Riordan, there's an acronym called TINA, and it stands for There Is No Alternative. And the last person in public life that was associated with was Mrs. Thatcher. And you have socialist leanings like myself, so I'm amazed to see that you're endorsing that, because there's always an alternative. And as legislators, you have a grave responsibility to find the alternative if what you're doing or if what you're planning is unjust. You have a huge responsibility and a duty to do that. I'm delighted you brought up the thing of lobbying. I'm developing a very severe bee in my bonnet about this, about it. You feel the hard edge of it as politicians, and I could say with disastrous consequences. Personally, I feel very strongly about people treating politicians with decency and kindness and all of those courtesy. To play the policy, never play the man or the woman, and I think we'd be totally in agreement on that. And obviously that those of us who are foolish enough to raise our heads above the parapet, that we'd get the same kind of treatment, it'd be nice too. Just two other things that were asked directly to me, so I'll deal with them quickly, if I may. One is the thing about fathers and family members and regret. The systematic review that you've heard a huge amount about over the last few days, in terms, the biggest systematic review that has been done, has two very interesting things in it. One is it said it was absolutely outside the scope of it to look at the impact on fathers or the impact on families. And you said the voice of the woman in crisis is missing. The voice, I personally hate when people say men don't have an input into this, because lads, you have a huge input into pregnancy. So I think it's very important that be taken into account. The other thing is that they couldn't cover was regret. And that has very much been absent. I just, one tiny thing, I have to speak to Deputy O'Keefe, because she did address me directly in it. If you look at the submission, that quote is taken from a book, slightly adjusted, which is called An Open Letter to the Mothers Feminism Forgot. And it's by Maureen Freely, and she's a pro-choice Guardian writer who writes in the Guardian and the Independent. And it was she who said, it's not the baby that ruins your life, it's everybody else.
Ms. Dean.
Yes, I'd briefly like to address the question raised by Deputy Healy-Eames in relation to obstetricians and flexibility and whether the 1861 Act, I think it was, is legally adequate to preserve life and give doctors flexibility and so on. This was raised, the issue of substantial risk was raised by the Master of the National Maternity Hospital during the course of these hearings. She raised the issue about what constitutes a substantial risk under the legal test at the moment, of course, which is there's a real and substantial risk to the life of the mother. And it should be borne in mind that the law is not capable of reducing the assessment of risk to a statistical exercise, and indeed it would be dangerous to do so for doctors and obviously for women and their babies too. The assessment of risk has to be carried out by the clinician in light of his or her knowledge of the circumstances of the particular patient that is before them. And what the test requires is that the risk be real, so it's not hypothetical, and that it be substantial, not insubstantial or trivial. And subject to this, the test actually affords considerable flexibility to doctors. It's a really simple test, and it is left, I suppose, with the doctor, acting, of course, in good faith always, to judge the situation. And this flexibility is actually demonstrated by the absence, and I would repeat that again, the absence of any prosecutions under the 1861 Act. There is, of course, a significant rider to the effect that the termination must be the only means of saving the life of the woman. And that's important to remember, obviously, as legislators. And furthermore, under Irish law, the unborn child is recognised as having an equal right to life to that of the mother. And the vindication of that right requires that, without obviously ever endangering the life of the mother, that no effort should be spared to save the life of the baby as well. And then finally, just in relation to, there was some talk about the X case, it should be borne in mind that the Supreme Court was obviously constrained by the particular facts of that case. There was no further evidence, on the basis of the evidence that was put before them, there was no countervailing evidence put up by the state, and the Supreme Court wasn't free to ask for more evidence of their own volition. The Oireachtas is not so constrained, and given the amount of information that has come out, and given the international studies that have been dealt with by the other speakers here today about the risk, the increase in risk of suicide following an abortion relative to the increase in risk following giving birth, I would say that it is very important that the Oireachtas doesn't constrain itself to the terms of the X case alone, as the Supreme Court was so constrained. Thank you.
Mr. Manley. And if you're sharing time with Mr. Carr, it's 5 minutes between you.
I'll try to be as brief as possible to make clear the distinction between a necessary medical intervention into for a woman who's facing a serious risk to her life, and where the child dies, and an abortion, what is commonly called an abortion. Now, I think there is a huge difference to what takes place, what are those 30 cases that were mentioned by one of the obstetricians taking place in an Irish maternity hospital, and what takes place in a clinic in London, an abortion clinic in London. And the first thing is the intention. The intention of the abortionist is quite simple. It is to kill the child. That's the only thing. The intention of the obstetrician in a maternity hospital is to save the life of the mother, and, if at all possible, to save the life of the child. The second thing is that the intervention of the obstetrician in a maternity hospital is necessary. If nothing is done, the woman may well die. So it has to be quick, it has to be accurate, as it were, and effective. In the case of the abortionist, an abortion, an elective abortion, is something that is not necessary. It is chosen, it is sought, and it is paid for. And the last thing, and this is again very important, the type of action that takes place. An obstetrician will treat the ill mother for certain ailments. Let's take heart trouble or cancer. That is the very same type of treatment that is given to a woman who is not pregnant. If the woman has cancer of the womb, whether she's pregnant or not, the same type of treatment will be given. The abortionist in London will not give the treatment that he gives to the pregnant woman to a non-pregnant woman. It doesn't make sense. You're dealing with morally, and it should be legally, two very different things. And I hope if there is legislation that this is made quite clear. Thank you.
Mr. Carr, you got 2.5 minutes.
First of all, it's clear that I won't get to answer all the questions that have been asked, and I apologise to those senators and deputies whose questions I don't reach. I'd certainly be happy to engage with them after the conclusion of these hearings, if that's helpful to them. Just a couple of points. Several members raised the question of the authority of the Supreme Court, Deputy O'Riordan, Deputy Durkin and Senator O'Keefe at least. We do have a precedent for a case where a decision of the Supreme Court was considered to create such difficulties that it was necessary to have a referendum to reverse it. It was in relation to the law on adoption. So, I mean, it's not unheard of that the court would make what would generally be considered to be at least an unhelpful decision. We should bear in mind too that there is an even higher authority than the Supreme Court, and that is the people. And we've had cases where decisions of the people have been reversed by subsequent referendum, usually on the basis that the initial vote didn't accurately represent the people's wishes. So that's something else that's worth bearing in mind. Just briefly on the question of lobbying that Deputy O'Riordan raised, I would certainly echo what Rita said. I think it's extremely important that those who lobby their elected representatives do so in a respectful and courteous manner. I'm sure as elected representatives you welcome hearing from your constituents and knowing what their concerns are. I would urge anyone who contacts you in relation to this issue to do so in a respectful fashion. I think some of the comments, particularly on social media, that we've seen in recent times have been utterly appalling. And I would point out, however, that many of these are coming, if you like, from the other side of the argument.
Say, Mr. Carr, it's from both sides of the equation.
Well,
as somebody who uses social media, it's both sides.
Well, I would have no hesitation in condemning it from whichever side it comes. I'd be unequivocal on that point.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. O'Donnell? 5 minutes.
Yeah, if I can just begin, actually, if you don't mind, yeah, sorry. I'll just begin by saying, yes, I am a Democrat, actually. I do believe in the democratic process and I respect it. There were two questions directly raised about the recent International Symposium on Maternal Health Care that I was directly involved with, and the declaration that came out of that. And people want further elaboration on that. On the 8th of September of this year, a symposium on maternal health care was held in Dublin. It was chiefly organised by Professor Eamon O'Dwyer of the National University of Ireland in Galway, who was one of Ireland's most senior obstetricians, has an absolute impeccable track record of obstetrical care. That symposium was addressed by international experts in the fields of maternal health care, emergency obstetrics and indeed cancer and pregnancy. And we had the world's leading expert in cancer and pregnancy, Professor Frédéric Amand from Belgium, come and address that conference. It was extremely well attended, over 160 medical practitioners attending. At the end of that symposium, a declaration which is now commonly known as the Dublin Declaration was released. I won't read it in its entirety, but it's got 3 main points. The first point is that abortion is never medically necessary. The direct and intentional termination of the life of the unborn child is medically necessary. Number 2, that there is a fundamental difference between abortion, which as I just described, and emergency medical treatments or any medical treatment a woman may need to save her life. And thirdly, that the prohibition of abortion does not affect in any way the availability of optimal care to pregnant women. That declaration has been released in the past few weeks, and to date we have 400 medical doctors, medical practitioners signed up in support of that declaration. Somebody mentioned the dismissive way Dr. Ronan O'Mahony addressed this declaration last week, and I just want to point out that in fact 2 of the signatories on this declaration, one is a former predecessor of hers, former master of the National Maternity Hospital in Holles Street, and a second signatory of this declaration is a current professor of obstetrics existing in her own hospital. So I think that only draws the conclusion that there is disagreement to what Dr. O'Mahony addressed yourselves with during the week. And I thirdly just want to mention something that was directly addressed to me and the group I'm here representing. I believe that the young people I work with in Youth Defence do everything that they can to save babies from being killed through abortion. They do so in a perfectly normal way. I don't think their campaigns are in any way abhorrent or anything. And I do believe that we are people who do work in pro-life, particularly certain young people, are subjected to abuse on social media also, including from very senior people in the Labour Party, including the Director of Elections from Cork, Keith O'Brien, who recently tweeted that anybody involved in youth defence should be punched in the face.
We won't mention names who are not here in the House and who are not members, so please don't name people's names who are not here.
That's fair enough. I just want to point out that it is a myth that all of this kind of social media bullying, etc., is coming from one side. I have been subjected to many abuse on social media.
I think to be fair to myself as chairperson, we didn't say it was coming from one side; it's coming from both sides.
Fair enough. Okay.
And I would make the point respectfully that, in my humble opinion, your campaigning methodology needs to be reviewed. As somebody who's very moderate and
I would have to disagree.
Okay, that's fine. Dr. Dunn.
Paulie.
I think that the dignity of these hearings has just been impugned by both yourself and the deputy behind me. There should have been a maintenance of the level of respect which has continued up until this time.
The chair is respectful of all sides of the debate.
The chair has not been respectful. The chair has just accused one organisation of lobbying in an inappropriate manner and should not do so.
I'm entitled as chair to make an opinion on a question that was asked, and I've defended all members and all sides of the debate here. And in my humble opinion,
you turned this at the very end into an adversarial encounter. But I'm going to answer the questions in relation to why is it that after what we've believed to be an absolute ban on abortion in Ireland going back to 1983, which the day after that referendum was passed in 1983, Mary Robinson, when addressing the abortion campaigners at the time, she reassured them that despite the fact that they had been well beaten in that referendum, that not to worry, that abortion would be legalised in Ireland by the European courts within 15 years. Now, obviously, her 15 years was wrong, and it would appear as though the current government are trying to impose abortion through using a non-binding recommendation of the European Court of Human Rights. The second thing is that in terms of lobbying techniques, to a large degree, most groups will lobby depending on the seriousness of the issue that they're dealing with. You're dealing with one of the most serious issues that there is. After the Second World War, when people looked at what was seen in the death camps, there were pictures shown and continue to be shown all over the world of corpses piled upon corpses, because they said, we must make sure this never happens again. And if you believe, as the vast majority of people in this country do, that abortion involves the killing of an innocent human being, well then, if you don't like the reality of it, right, don't legalise it.
Thank you. Thank you. As time allocated has expired. No, we're way over time, sorry. We're way over time, sorry, Senator. We're way over time. Sorry, Deputy, we're way over time. Sorry. Very briefly, Senator Healy Ames and Deputy Minister Cotton-Kennedy. Very briefly.
Just to ask Sean to answer the question I asked.
Okay, and Deputy Cotton-Kennedy, very briefly.
I asked a question in assisting the 19-year-old suicidal woman that you spoke about in your evidence to this hearing. What type of framework are you recommending us to put in place so that we can best provide for that suicidal woman?
Sorry, and Deputy Senator Walsh, very quickly now, I'm being fair now to everybody. Sorry, Deputy Kennedy, sorry.
Would you agree or
Sorry, Jim, sorry.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
Just to clarify, in relation to the EWTN comment that I made earlier in question, just to advise Ms Simons that she ought to take a look at it, because not only is she on it, there's a comment on the end of it thanking her for contributing to the Life Crisis in Ireland programme shorts, and I believe that my question is relevant in relation to whether there is an agreement that agents of the culture of death are attempting to have abortion legalised in this country. I think it's a very valid question.
Thank you. And very quickly, Senator Walsh.
Would you agree or disagree with me that protection for the unborn...
Who are you asking the question? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm asking the question. I'm asking it to the group.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. That the protection for the unborn is the real human rights issue of our day.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, just half a minute each.
Just, sorry, in relation to the EWTN thing, I wasn't aware that I was on it. I don't know any agents of the culture of death, I hope. Certainly they haven't identified themselves as such to me. That's not to say that I don't believe that there are interests both within the country and outside the country who are trying to influence the debate here, who would favour the legislation of widespread abortion.
If we do half a minute.
I would just agree with Senator Jim Walsh that abortion claims more innocent human lives than any other human rights issue my generation has seen. So I would echo his sentiment that it is one of the most important human rights issues of my generation.
Mr. Manley.
150 years ago, 200 years ago, human rights of people from Africa of different colour was the supreme human rights thing. Today, it is the unborn.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. O'Brien.
I would see it as one of a number of many important ones that I think are all of a piece. Opposition to the death penalty, opposition to war, aid to the developing world, justice for particularly girls in the developing world. I think they're all linked together, and I think they're all of a piece, and they're something we should all support. And as a part of that, the right to life of the unborn and the care and protection of women is a part of that.
Okay. Can I thank or... Sorry, can I
answer the question?
Sorry.
I didn't get an answer to the question.
Half a minute.
In 1992, I made it very, very clear that there were a very substantial number of women who were suffering with post-abortion psychological problems. I indicated at that time that it was essential that we would provide post-abortion counselling. The IFPA at that time argued that there was no such thing as post-abortion psychological sequelae, and 6 years later they opened their first post-abortion counselling centre in Cathal Street.
Thank you very much. Can I sincerely thank our witnesses for coming in, and could I in particular wish Miss Maria Steen best luck with your new arrival, and I hope everything goes well for you. Can I thank you very much for coming this morning and for taking time to be here with us, and you've helped inform the debate, and thank you most sincerely for coming in. Can I thank the members for your courtesy and your patience, and we're going to resume again at 2:45. Thank you, promptly.